Railroading is a safe mode of transportation, if not the safest. The vast majority of trips are routine. Trouble is usually no worse than a broken air hose or frozen switch. But during the course of a career, there is an occasional misadventure.
Just lately here, we got one scare where we came around curve at Oneida, and the opposing train from a different railroad was supposed to be in the siding, and he had left his headlight on. And we came around the curve, and it looked like he was on the main line. And my heartbeat went from about 55 on up to 255, and we were reaching for the door, ready to strap on the ejection seats. Turned out he was in the siding and had his headlight on. I forgot to turn it off. That gave us a super scare.
One of the most vivid ones, Spin Olson and I were on the Kewaunee job. We left Green Bay, and they said, when you get down by the Kewaunee River, slow down to 15 miles an hour. Well, we went a little ways, and they called up and said, slow down to 10 miles an hour. And we got down by Kewaunee, and they said, well, due to the ice pile up by the bridge, reduce to 5 miles an hour. Well, we went out on the bridge, and we no more than got out on the bridge with the lead unit, and the hind end of the bridge went down, and the front end went up, and the spikes come out of, you could see the spikes sticking out of the planks on the bridge like this. And of course the section men were down there, back off, back off, back off. Well, there was no way. We had the train in emergency. And one of the things that Spin Olson did, he sat there and pumped that engine up until it was fully charged, and then he eased them off. And when we came off the bridge, the front of the plow on the front of the engine scraped the railhead as we backed off of the bridge. And later the track superintendent come down, he said, what are you guys doing here? And he said, no, he said, there's nothing left under that bridge. He said, he said, you guys should have been in the drink. So that was probably the most frightening.
And then there was one on the west end, which was kind of funny in a way. It was around Dexterville, I believe, coming along around about 49 miles an hour, coming on number 2, with about 90 or 100 cars. And the air went, and I looked back, you could see like 3/4 of a mile back, the train coming around a curve nicely and gently and everything like that. So I called up the conductor in the caboose at Austin. The air went, I think we must have broken half. Let me know when the hind end stops. And he answered something to the effect, yes, we're stopped now. The caboose is laying on its side here in the ditch, and Hobbick is bleeding to beat hell. But by the time, the other brakeman back there had just bumped his head on a rod, and it wasn't really bad. By the time we got back there, he was just leaning against a crossbuck, swearing to himself. It wasn't really bad, but there were about a dozen cars lined up in a ditch, very neatly, I might say.
They know what caused it?
Yeah, it was a heat kink in the rail.
The most recent one was around milepost 5 at coming into Green Bay in July of '92, when the I believe it was the 4th or 5th car ahead of the caboose went on the ground, and we put about 6 or 7 cars in the ditch, and when we got done, all that was left on the rail was one set of trucks on the car ahead of the caboose, and the rest were cement cars were derailed and tipped over in the ditch.
Few cars ahead of the caboose, one of the wheel flanges climbed the rail and decided to go its own direction, and that started the ball rolling. And the caboose came to immediately an abrupt halt, and Robert Vanderleest, the conductor, who, by the way, was just an outstanding individual, worked for a good conductor, came to a quick halt, came flying out of his seat, missed the stove there. Luckily, God was looking upon him at that time. The only car left on the track was one boxcar and his caboose.
That was the most severe slack I had ever received at a caboose. It was just instant stopping. It was quick.
Just west of City Point. It was in July, if I recall this correctly, and it was a hot day, and we were running along, and what they thought caused it was a sun kink under the train. When you get the tonnage going, creates the rail to buckle under the train under extreme heat. And we were in a curve, and just so happened that it was on my side where I ride on the fireman's side. It would be on the north side of the train. We approached into a curve, and I looked back, and we were approximately 25, 30 car lengths around, going around the curve, and the air went as I was looking back. And the next thing that I saw was something I'll probably never forget in my life. Was I seen box cars and tank cars going end for end. Dust was flying, and my exact words probably at the time was, "Holy!" And when we stopped, I got off, and Highway 54 runs right along the track there. I walked out there to the highway and got out to the road, and the first vehicle was an old Chevy pickup, about 1952. And flagged him down. Here was an elderly fella, I'd say pretty close to 70. He had his fly rod sticking out the window, and I just flagged him down. I says, "I think we had a derailment," I says, "back where the dust is flying there. Would you give me a ride down there?" He said, "Sure, son, get in." So we got in, and you know how older fellas drive. He had a standard transmission. Took off in low gear about 3 miles an hour and put it in second. We went about 5, and then we had it in third gear doing about 15 a chugging, you know. He reminisced he was trout fishing. So he was telling me what he's done. He wasn't worried about what happened with the train. He was worried about telling me how many fish he caught. Well, then we finally got back to where the wreck was, and there was 2 other cars there on the scene at the time. And then I got out, and I was amazed. It was the first big train wreck that I was ever on, is how the cars, like I saw them rolling, but when you got down there were so many of them that were lined up side by side, just like somebody parallel parked them. And then like the trucks were all like in one spot, cars were all over here, and a tank car laying under a nice white pine like a shade tree. And it was like the track, where the track was, there was hardly nothing there. It was just like the dirt bed, because it had torn out the track and the ties. And it was, if I recall, it was like 26 or 28 cars that went in the ditch on that derailment. And it was right out of the middle of the train, pretty close. And that would probably have been pretty hairy if it would have got to the caboose with the conductor in it, which was Julius Wachowiak at the time. But that was my worst one, and it was interesting. I won't forget it.
A fine railroad tradition is the runaway train story.
We left Manawa, Wisconsin with about 100 and some cars. Coming into New London, it's downhill from Manawa to New London, but they had no problem controlling it. It seemed, I drew off, it seemed to work fine, slowed down. Kind of a heavy pull out of New London that kind of gave me pause. They didn't seem to want to release right away. But I thought, well, cold weather and things were affecting the pumping back of the air and release of the brakes. So when we got to Black Creek, heck, I hardly had to touch the brakes, and we came to a nice halt, took a few pounds off, came to a nice halt. We pulled down the light was red, and he went and wound the clock. So we took off again. They pulled fairly hard, and we got to Seymour, and you pick up speed generally there. And I said to the conductor, Jubilius, the hind end, I said, "How's the air back there?" And he said it was fine. 70-some pounds and no problem, and things seem to be setting up real good. So set the air a few more times. You generally pick up speed at milepost 14, and down into 13 there you can really get going in that area. So I said to Dick, I said, I just set the air, and things aren't adding up here. There's something wrong, and keep an eye on it. And he said, okay. Got to Oneida. And from Oneida to milepost 4 is downhill, and they'll get away on you real fine shape there. You can go like crazy. So as we rounded the curve at Oneida, things didn't seem right, and the dispatcher happened to call up, and he said there are switch engines on the main line at Benton Processing, and that's right at milepost 4. And I thought to myself, if they're on the main line and we got air problems, we can't get these things slowed down in enough shape to stop clear of them, I better bring the train to a halt here. Something was wrong. So I said to Dick, I want to draw off here. Tell me what's happening back there. And he said, well, nothing at the moment here. Have you drawn off? I said, yeah, I drew off quite a bit. I'll draw off some more. Nothing happened. We're picking up speed. Quite a downhill thing there. And I said to Dick, I can't go any farther. We're going to be in big problems here. So I put an emergency, and I asked him, did it go into emergency back there? And he said, no. And that got me super concerned because our speed was picking up. We were probably reaching close to the maximum speed limit allowed there at that time, 35. And if we can get things under control, we were going to come into Green Bay like no other train has ever come in. After a few minutes, or maybe 30 seconds to a minute, the train went into emergency back by Dick. So my experience of this was, through the years, was that there was an angle cock turn someplace. The head-end brakeman got out, went back to check the train over, and wouldn't you know it, the first car behind the locomotive, the angle cock was only partly open. And that was the reason for the long reaction time when you would draw air off and the brakes would not set up right away. It took forever. They would not release right away. And the reason that when I put into emergency, it took so long to reach the hind end. So that was another interesting experience I had.
Railroaders often find humor in derailments and close calls if there aren't serious injuries. But grade crossing accidents are never funny.
As far as frightening, I think that right now the thing that's frightening is you either see a gas truck or a school bus coming to a crossing with indications that it might not stop in time. That to me is frightening. One for one reason and one obviously for the other reason. But those are frightening.
Probably the worst one I had, Jerry Lemron was the engineer and I was the fireman, and he let me run out of Kewaunee. It was a Sunday afternoon in the spring of the year, and we had a car with 7 kids in it, and 3 of them were killed. That's probably the worst trip that I ever had.
I think the fatal accidents, I think that kind of bugs you. You know, though there's something you don't like to dwell on or anything like that, but it kind of sticks with you for a while.